peoples and is currently the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I just want to really reaffirm my personal commitment and the Ontario Green Party's commitment to the truth and reconciliation process, and just to express my gratitude of just how much I've learned from Indigenous people, especially when it comes to caring for the people and places we love, the land, the water, the animals, birds, fish that live here and call this place home, and how important it is to protect it for the next 7 generations. So, and I think that's a very important part of the conversation I'm going to have today with Toni Ellis. Toni is a board member of the Elora Environment Center and coordinates its urban tree program, Neighborhoods, which mobilizes volunteers to plant, steward, inventory, and advocate for our community's urban forests. Toni managed Forest Ontario's Heritage Tree Program, which recognized the province's most historically significant trees. In 2019, she spearheaded Tree Trust, a program of the Elora Environment Center, and it's the only one of its kind. Tree Trust is dedicated to preserving mature urban trees and encouraging the public to safeguard their own trees. And there are now 7 Tree Trust chapters in Southern Ontario, each one of them doing great work, including here in Guelph, where Toni and I were part of a fantastic project around preserving mature trees here in Guelph. And so, Toni, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for giving me the chance to talk about trees. It's my favorite topic.
I know, I was so impressed. The event we did at Woodlawn Memorial, I was just so impressed of the speech you gave, but just the work you're doing and the subsequent meetings we've had since then. And I just thought it was so important for people across the province to hear about the important work you're doing and to learn more about it. And so I know most people are aware that trees play an important role in helping us to adapt to and also to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. And I'm just wondering if you can break down for us what some of the important roles that trees play in helping us deal with climate.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Yeah, trees are so vital and important, especially in an urban environment. They do a whole bunch of things. So we know that they store carbon. That's why it's been a strategy to plant trees as a carbon, as a way, a low tech but beautiful way to address the need to mitigate some of the climate change. But there's a bunch of other things that they do for us too. They for one thing, it's very interesting. They really slow storm water, so rainfall. So when the rain falls down, instead of just running down our streets and into the sewer and overloading the water management plans in the municipalities, they allow the water to percolate into the ground and recharge the water table. They, of course, provide shade, which everybody knows. In fact, in the city of Toronto, trees are a part of their cancer prevention strategy, because so many of us are going to succumb to skin cancers. And so if we can stay out of the sun, that's a really good thing. A huge benefit from mental health point of view, which I think we all got to see during the pandemic, that how much time we were spending outdoors. And it's interesting, street trees actually help slow traffic down, because people have the perception that the streets are more narrow. So it has a safety value as well. And specifically related to climate change, trees really reduce heat, the heat island effect, which is, where there's too much pavement. And in fact, it cuts it by 6 to 10% Fahrenheit. So trees really reduce the feeling of the temperature and the temperature itself. And one time I had a call from a homeowner who was arguing to cut down her tree, and I was trying to make the case, don't cut down your tree. And she did. And then she actually had, she was brave enough to call me back and say, you know what, that was a mistake. I now need to use my air conditioner. So, so lots and lots of benefits. And of course, if we're not using air conditioning, we're not burning fossil fuels to, add to the climate change woes.
Yeah, thanks for that, Toni. And I'll just let you know, my dog Helix may pop his head up into the screen here. He's decided to join us. I think he partly he loves the tree right outside my front door for multiple reasons, which I'll leave to everyone's imagination. But I was thinking of the heat island effect. Just, we've had these extreme heat days, and then obviously the smoky skies from just these horrendous wildfires that are happening. And I happened to be in Toronto the other day on one of the really hot days, and I was doing a walk around Ontario Place, and you just, from the pavement of the parking lot to like the glade where they like 850 trees that are unfortunately being threatened to be cut down because of this crazy spa that Doug Ford wants to build there on public land. But I was just thinking, like, just the difference in temperature and the way it affected my body, I could feel it. And also just your mental health, you're not under the same levels of stress. Just, I guess, the importance of urban tree canopies, access to public parkland. Like, maybe you could just comment a bit on, the importance of that and the important role trees play in that regard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We really, they definitely make you feel better. There's a whole philosophy around forest bathing when you can spend at least 15 minutes around trees. There's physiological changes that happen to us. Our blood pressure drops, our heart rate drops. We just feel better to be around trees. And it's some interesting research is going on about the disparity between low income neighborhoods who tend not to have as many trees as higher income neighborhoods. So the priority neighborhoods tend to not have the kind of tree canopy that would be super helpful to them. So yeah, the heat island effect is a real thing. And it speaks to the fact that often we don't even think about making room to put trees in the ground, right? We just pave over because it's tidy. Frankly, the engineers like it. They don't have to deal with negotiating around a tree and the tree roots. So really, as we increasingly densify, it's more important than ever that we make room and space for the trees for the values that you just said. They make us feel better and that we're cooler and mentally healthier.
Yeah, and I would say, Toni, you probably have, most people know me. I'm a huge fan of tree planting. And here locally, I've been a big proponent and advocate and supporter of the Rotary Forest, which planting a lot of trees around Guelph Lake and now in the southern part of the city, and certainly will always be a strong supporter of tree planting. That being said, you have emphasized, and Tree Trust has emphasized, that as equally important, or perhaps arguably even more important than planting trees, is actually protecting our existing tree canopy and mature trees. And I'm just wondering if you could just share your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I sure would love to do that. Tree planting is great. And like you, I have planted a whole bunch of trees myself. And tree planting is a wonderful thing. There are some challenges that new trees face, particularly in an urban environment, and I can go into that in a minute, but it's protecting what we already have. That is, frankly, the Tree Trust mantra. These are the trees that are doing so much for us right this minute. They're sequestering a whole lot of carbon. They're providing all the environmental benefits that we just talked about. And they're there, right? And they're survivor trees. They've managed to make it to adulthood, and they're mature, and they're providing all of those good benefits for us. And often they are planted from local seeds, which is really vital. They were planted, 50, 100 years ago by people who, and the soil's well adapted to the tree, or the tree is well adapted to the soil. And there's some really interesting research, and it's not at all surprising when you think about it, that a one big mature tree is doing the work of at least 300 little saplings. And that's assuming all those little saplings even make it, which is a story that we've all seen. Those little saplings struggle. They're neglected. They don't get watered. They get dinged with whippersnippers, not so much, obviously, luckily, in the Rotary Forest, but certainly in an urban environment where people are manicuring their lawns and so on. So our new saplings really struggle. And So the trees that we already have, and we just actually, Mike, we just did a little competition here in Elora on, in Ferguson, Elora on, nominate your favorite tree, to be tree of the year. And we had about 40 nominations, and oh my goodness, people's affection for these big trees and their connection to them from a historical point of view is quite heartwarming. And so that's the other thing. The big trees are, people connect to them, and so do the animals and the birds.
Absolutely. So I'm curious. So you've made a pretty compelling case of why it's important to protect trees, particularly mature trees in urban environments. But we also know, and I've seen trees die, trees be cut down, etc. And I'm just wondering if you could inform us of some of the, I guess, threats and challenges that these mature urban trees are facing.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, they're certainly facing neglect, right? People rarely think about taking care of a big tree. There's a kind of a cool analogy that says, if you own a big tree on your property, you really should be taking a look at it every 20, 30 years, just the way you need to look at your roof, and maybe your driveway needs repaving, or any of those sort of infrastructure things you do for your own home. It's a good idea to look at your trees from the same point of view. And sadly, often people don't even think about their tree until a limb falls down. And then they go, oh yeah, right, I better take a look at the tree. And often what happens, if it's a municipal tree, the municipal response is, let's just take it down. And so, which is unfortunate, because first of all, had there been some proactive work on that tree, which is the thing Tree Trust does, if we can get to that tree before it starts to have issues like that, we can keep it healthier longer. Secondly, if a limb falls down, removal is not necessarily the only option. There are ways you can save them. Not always, but often you can save them. So we really, it's a really great idea if we can take a look at our trees and how is it that we can keep them growing on the landscape, because they're established and they're an important part of our community and what makes our neighborhoods beautiful. So sometimes removal is all you can do, but if you can avoid removal, that's a really good thing. And one of the things Tree Trust is starting to do, while our emphasis is on taking care of the mature trees, we're also starting to do some of what I call the teenage trees, the younger trees, or I think they're called juvenile trees. So the trees that are maybe 20 or 30 years old and they need a little bit of pruning in order to have really good architecture when they get to be bigger. So that's when the pruning wounds are small, it's less traumatic on the tree, and it will help them become bigger, beautiful trees later on with good architecture, and it's much cheaper. And it might be the only time you actually have to intervene on a tree. So, but again, it's about reminding people to take care of their trees. That's a big part of the message for Tree Trust. And I know it's not an inexpensive thing to do, but if you think about the lifespan of a tree, if you have to put $1,000 or $1,500 into your tree over the course of its lifetime, it's a real investment in adding a value to your home too.
Yeah. Well, I know any home I've ever gone to purchase, like having a mature tree there just adds so much value, at least personal value for me. One of the things that you mentioned in the opening that I think is an important thing to highlight when we're dealing with extreme weather is that oftentimes people who are facing housing or income insecurity, people who are more vulnerable, are more adversely affected by extreme heat and weather. And part of it is they oftentimes live in neighborhoods where you don't have mature trees, or folks are unable to afford to maintain trees if they do have them on their private property. And are there things that municipalities can do to ensure that people who may live in more lower income or more vulnerable neighborhoods to ensure that they have access to tree canopies and immature trees as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's starting to become an issue, and it's going to obviously be by municipality by municipality. There is a couple of NGOs I know working in Toronto that are working to try to get more trees into those neighborhoods. There was an interesting study actually that talked about an area where there was one high rise, again in a priority neighborhood, and the one high rise had a tree and one did not, and the high rise with the tree had reduced incidents of violence or discord in the community. So even one tree made a real difference to their neighborhood. One of the things that Tree Trust is doing is we raise public donations to take care of trees, and some of our chapters are taking care of trees in for private homes. So that's a situation here in Elora. We're doing that. So if there's a home where that's an issue, the finances of taking care of the tree are a challenge, we can sweep in with public donations to help with that. So yeah.
On that note, maybe to give you a chance to just say, if people want some more information about how they can get involved in Tree Trust, maybe have a Tree Trust chapter, or just how, Tree Trust can support their community. Can you give us a little information about like what the organization does in a bit more detail, and just how you might get in contact with you?
Oh, thanks, Mike. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, we've been around, I think you said at the beginning, since 2019, and we started just here in Elora and Fergus as an idea, and it grew from that. And so because we're a registered, Tree Trust is part of the Environment Center, which is a registered charity. So people who make donations get a tax receipt for that. And in fact, we made a pretty good link between climate change, flying, which a lot of people, I know you never get on an airplane, but those of us who do get on an airplane are feeling a little bit guilty for doing so. So there is a carbon calculator on our website that people can use to figure out, roughly speaking, the carbon cost of their flying. And then there's a suggested donation amount to that. And then all of the donations go directly to hiring what we call Tree Trust approved arborists. So these are the arborists who are really at the top of their game. They understand conservation of arboriculture techniques. They understand how when they make cuts on a tree, it'll extend the life of the tree. And so they improve the architecture so the tree can keep growing. And then as part of the program, we always plant a couple of little understudy trees nearby, knowing that one day the big tree will come down. And so, yeah, we have, as I said, as you said, 7 chapters. And so if other communities are interested in getting involved, we would love to talk to you about setting up a chapter. It's pretty straightforward. We've made it as easy as we possibly can. Our website lists all the chapters and how you can get involved and how you can make a donation. Yeah, so, and sometimes our donors come because they feel guilty for flying, but you know what? Most of them now are coming because they want to see the big trees stay on the landscape. And one of the things that we point out is that all of the donations go directly into your own community. So you can see your donation at work. We always invite our donors to come out and watch the arborists in action, which is so exciting when you see them in the top of a canopy and they're way out on the far limbs because they make very small, precise pruning cuts to help the tree. And it's quite thrilling, actually, to watch them at work.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to watch them at work here in Guelph, and it is pretty spectacular to watch.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody said, do their parents know what they do for a living?
Yes, and I think some of the young kids were wanting to join them in the treetops because it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say I live somewhere where there is not a Tree Trust chapter, and I'm looking at taking some steps to help preserve either the tree canopy, on my own property or just in the neighborhood. What are some things that people can do?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Well, we're encouraging people to find out if there's a tree organization in your community, first of all, and sort of work together with them. Become a tree ambassador, talk to your friends and neighbors about the value and importance of trees. And interestingly, sometimes we talk to people who say these trees are a nuisance. I'm tired of raking up the leaves in the fall. And so that's a really good opportunity to just point out to them, well, you might not be aware of all the value of trees. And there are some good stats that you can get a really interesting website called treesaregood.com, where you can find out the value of your tree from all of the ecological services that it gives you. And then you can adopt a tree. And in fact, that's a program that we're starting to take a look at. So if there's a tree in your neighborhood that you love, you might want to kind of adopt it and take care of it. And while the big trees, and I should mention that while the big trees are fairly self-sufficient, if it's times of great drought, then watering out at the drip line where the feeder roots are is never a wrong thing with a trickle hose. And ditto, getting mulch out there too to keep the roots cool are two good things that you can do. And we actually have had a couple of inquiries from people who don't really want to get involved in setting up a whole chapter, but they just want to see a tree saved. So we're happy to work with them on that and help them raise some money. And then we can get an arborist into that one particular tree. And the hope is that perhaps that will become perhaps down the road a tree trust chapter. We don't know. The other thing that we're doing too, Mike, is I can just mention that we're starting to try to advocate for a broader swath of trees. So while our entry point in a community is to save a given tree, we're also starting to get involved in trying to help our tree trust chapters advocate for more municipal engagement, some bylaw protection around the trees, that kind of thing.
Great. You mentioned a couple things. One was ecosystem services. So I'm going to jump off on that, and also broadening your perspective. And I was hoping to maybe just briefly, before our time is up, broaden the conversation a bit. You probably know I've been pretty vocal about this, that there's a lot of public outrage really at the Ford government's decision to remove 7,400 acres from Ontario's Greenbelt. And the Greenbelt provides $3.2 billion in ecosystem services, including $224 million in flood protection, and it offsets 71 million tons of carbon each year through its protected forests, wetlands, and grasslands. And I know in the Greenbelt debate, I've focused, and many of us have focused on the just vital need to protect Ontario's farmland. But we're also talking about losing forests, wetlands, and grasslands, and in some cases, relatively mature forests. And I'm just wondering, what your thoughts from a tree trust perspective are, just in terms of how that's going to, affect like nature-based climate action, and also just like climate adaptation when it comes to protecting us from flooding, smoky skies, heat, etc.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous that this is being contemplated for a whole host of reasons. All of the ones that you've just said, Mike, I absolutely concur. Also, are we building any of the affordable housing there that is required? And my big thing, there's that. And of course, once it's gone, it's gone. This has been preserved for us. And how dare we infringe on that, quite frankly? We can't afford to lose this important part of what's making our climate a little bit better. And Southern Ontario is home to some of the best farmland, and for us to be paving over more of it is just ridiculous. And it's also, I feel, a bit of an embarrassment to Ontario, that at a time when we're all supposed to be scrambling, trying to do what we can to fight climate change, to be then doing the exact opposite by taking any of the Greenbelt out of doing all the good that it's doing right now, just seems very irresponsible at the very least.
Yeah, well, I certainly concur with you on that one, Toni. I'm curious, like, just maybe just highlight the importance of mature trees, because I know you and I have talked about that. And like, once you cut them down, pave it over, like those mature forests, those mature trees are gone forever, and just how long it takes to replace them,
Yeah, that's something I often talk about. I don't know if we will replace them. You know, we take down these big trees in an urban environment, and I think, I don't know, we're going to plant those little oaks. Will they ever become those mighty majestic oaks that we enjoy today? I don't know. Because the increasingly tough environment we're asking them to live in. So yeah, the other thing that people often don't really realize is where the trees come from, where the seed source comes from for those little trees. And I have I had two majestic sugar maples in front of my house that unfortunately were taken down against my pleas, but they left behind loads of little saplings, and those saplings are from those trees, which are really genetically adapted to our environment. So I'm getting those trees out in our neighborhood as best as I can, but that's not often the case. There is more and more emphasis on trying to plant local seeds, but to get those survivor trees that have withstood years and years of challenges for Hurricane Hazel and blizzards and all of that, those are really amazingly well adapted and survivor trees. So will we have those again? I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of sad to think about that, actually, Toni. I know our time is almost up, and I wouldn't want to have this conversation without giving you an opportunity to tell myself and my fellow MPPs, like, what can we be doing at Queen's Park to, support the protection and preservation of mature trees?
Oh, thank you. Well, two things. For one thing, there's no sort of standard across the board for urban forest issues. It's municipality by municipality. So I think there might be an opportunity for some discussion about coming up with some standardized practices for urban forestry, for urban forests. And then the other one is obviously financial support. There's been so much funding for tree planting and virtually none for maintaining the big mature trees. And I know there's some municipalities who are flirting with the notion of maybe we can give people a tax break on their municipal bill if they've got big trees, recognizing that while the tree is in your backyard, it's actually helping your whole neighborhood. Maybe there's an opportunity for public good. But I think really, like, it's quite a challenge to take care of these big trees. And boy, oh boy, it would be nice to see, given the value, particularly in climate change, but everything that they provide to us, if the government could take a look at helping support us. And of course, if there are any MPPs who are having to travel to Queen's Park, particularly by a plane, they might want to look at our little carbon calculator on our website and consider supporting tree trusts in their communities.
Sure. And what is your website? Just, I'm sure people.
Thank you. It's treetrust.ca.
Great. No, I appreciate you sharing that. Appreciate you taking the time today. And it's interesting. I've oftentimes talked about the importance of paying farmers, for example, for environmental goods and services. And I know that there are programs like property tax rebate programs for woodlot preservation in rural areas. And I hadn't thought of the importance of looking at programs like that in urban areas to help protect urban tree canopies. So that's definitely something I'm going to look into and explore further. So thank you for suggesting that. And Toni, I just want to say, thank you so much for joining us today. A half an hour goes by quickly, but I really have just really enjoyed getting to know you and was grateful that you'd asked me to participate in the big event you had in Guelph a few months ago. And thank you for taking the time today. And thank you for all the great work you're doing with Tree Trust.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know you and to tell our story. And of course, it's wonderful to talk to a fellow tree lover. It's encouraging.
Great. And I just want to say to everyone joining us today, thanks for taking the time to be a part of this important conversation. And I hope everyone stays cool this summer. It's certainly been a hot one, that's for sure. Take care, everyone.